SJ, welcome to Mvskoke Radio, your weekly source for tribal and community news, interesting guests and discussions, plus a local events calendar. Second segment, Mr. Drennan will be taking some folks through the suicide prevention subject. This is Suicide Prevention Month. Is that correct?
Yes, next week is Suicide Prevention Week, and we were discussing some of the things that the tribe's involved in and maybe some of the resources we have for our citizens and what we're doing to maybe change that stigma.
Right, and unfortunately it's a problem that sticks with us and we have to deal with. But let's get on with our first segment here. Let's see. Oh, that's not a good sign. Okay. Well, we'll try it now. Oh, boy.
It's never a good sign to get a business signal after you just called somebody.
Yeah. We're going to try that one again. Let me see if I can get her on the horn there. Nothing like live radio.
Oh, yeah. Well, it is a nice day here in sunny Okmulgee.
Yes, we can certainly say that. It's starting to get to the tail end of the summer.
Everything's starting to cool off. Trees are starting to change color, and weather's starting to get really nice.
Yeah.
It's my favorite time of year.
Hi, Isabel. Hi, yeah, we lost your signal there for a second. Okay, we're going to go live on the air now. All right, are you there with me? Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Okay. Well, let's get on with this. We've had our morning surprise here on live radio. Now, Isabel, you are a citizen of the Mvskoke Creek Nation. Why don't you give me an idea? You are a Wind Clan, is that right?
Yes. So in Okmulgee, Oklahoma, my mom is Sarai Cook, and she's a citizen as well. And we're from the Mvskoke tribal town.
Okay, great. Well, now, you've got a really tough subject to deal with, and that's the incarceration of Native people for various reasons. You want to work on changing that, is that correct?
Yeah, so I work on the generational cycle of incarceration.
Can you translate that into just plain old English there?
Yeah, so when a parent goes into prison or jail, that starts off a cycle of incarceration with their children seeing those effects that happen, and especially with in poor communities and marginalized communities, we start to see the kids going in and then their kids going in. And so really what I want to get at is preventing those kids from ever entering the justice system.
Have you discovered one of probably many reasons this happens? Is there something that you can point to?
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear that question.
Did you discover a reason this happens? I mean, the family, one after another, end up going into behind bars?
Yeah, so there's many reasons, but I think one of the reasons is the school-to-prison pipeline and the resources we give to students who have an incarcerated parent. So that's one thing I'm looking at, is where we can have more resources for kids to put more priority in their life with education or other passions they have in their lives. And then simply another reason for this is lacking mentorship or having someone there really to show them the reins of how to get out of this life and how to get out of this cycle, because once you're in it, it's really hard to see anything else that's going on, and having someone that's really strong in your life to be there for you is super helpful.
Have Have you looked at any numbers, how big a problem this is, or how many of our people are affected?
Yeah, so in Oklahoma, just Oklahoma alone, we incarcerate more people than anywhere else in the world. And that's a staggering statistic to me because we're in Oklahoma. It's not like we have bad people here at all. But to know that we're incarcerating more people than anywhere else is daunting to me. And so that's one statistic. And then we go down to the next level of how it's affecting Native people, where Native men have a 4 times likely chance to be incarcerated, and Native women have a 6 times more likely to be becoming incarcerated. So these are really clear disparities that there is a need here, and there needs to be a change in some way that we're dealing with the system.
How are you examining this problem? How does your study work?
So I'm examining this problem with what are all the contributing factors to a person that would become incarcerated. So one is definitely like your family, how you interact with your family. Another was school, how you're doing in school, because that's a clear indicator of kids then going to prison. Health-wise and mental health. So I'm just now starting on my research on I want to impact this change, and then that will then identify the policies I want to go ahead and move forward with. But that's where I'm coming at it from right now.
Have you had any direct contact or work with Native people who've been through this cycle of incarceration and release and going back, recidivism? I mean, have you spoken to them one-on-one, so to speak?
So I used to work with an organization in Oklahoma called the American Indian Criminal Justice Navigation Council. We were more on the reintegration side, with helping people find jobs or find licensing or figure out ways that they can transfer back into the community, because that's a really clear barrier that people are lacking the resources. There are organizations out there doing wonderful jobs, just like the Mvskoke Reintegration Center. They have so many different tools set out for Creek citizens that when they're returning back into the public, that they have so many things to rely on. But not all tribes are like that. I think our tribe is very special in that way, that they do that, and they've been progressive in that area. But there's still so much other avenues to do work in.
Okay. How long have you been at this, right?
So I've been at this about 2 years now. I was working at Southern Plains Tribal Health Board, and they were working on a new program called the American Indian Criminal Justice Navigation Council. And it was my story that had happened to me with the incarceration of my parents. I'd never really, I never talked about it because it was something that I felt embarrassed by. But through this program and creating this program, it made me start using my story to do the work that I'm doing, because I realized that I needed to tell my story. I needed to tell what's going on and change what's happening in Oklahoma, because I know I'm not the only one affected by this.
Hi, Isabel. This is Skylar. I'm a reporter here at Mvskoke Media. I'm sitting in on your interview with Gary. So you spoke about mental health, and that's going to be our next segment. And you spoke about a few things as far as like the incarceration rate and like education. I know a lot of common factors with these are Oklahoma is one of the highest with incarceration rates and one of the lowest with education. So what do we need to change to kind of slow down the incarceration rate with indigenous people?
So I think one thing is definitely giving more opportunity for the further education. I know something that worked with me is when I saw my mother be released from prison and pursue her education, it made it her priority. It made it easier for me to see, hey, I need to pay attention to what I'm doing in school so I can go further and get out of this cycle of incarceration. So I think having more tutoring, scholarships, that mentorship that's going to get these kids out of the cycle when they're in school. Because I know just the lack of budget. I know it's in Oklahoma's in that crisis, and so it's hard to ensure these practices. But if only we saw the need to increase these things, because in the long run, it's going to decrease our prison population.
So when you speak on mental health, what are some of the factors that you're seeing in people that maybe lead to them being incarcerated?
Well, from experience, it's the traumatic experience of seeing their parents get arrested or having to go visit them at the prisons. And I think that's part of the mental health, is making sure kids receive care in those areas, that they talk through their problems, and just have someone there to really have a shoulder to lean on. I think that's super important for the kids' mental health when they're later on growing up and they've dealt with issues than not having dealt with them.
Isabel, let me ask you this. You mentioned seeing a mother released from prison. How did that make you feel? I mean, your mental health here is obviously going to be affected, but what went through your mind and your heart when that was going on? Was it shame? Was it despair? Can you share something there?
Yeah, so I was 7 years old when I saw my mother get arrested and sentenced to prison. And at the time, I didn't fully understand what was happening, in that I was then being pushed, well, not pushed, but transferred to live with my grandmother. And so at the time, I just felt confused, because nobody wants to tell a little 7-year-old what's going on. And I didn't like that. I think we should be more honest with kids, because they're much smarter than they let on. So I was confused, but later on, spending more and more time at my grandmother's, I realized this was a more permanent situation, and that when the first time I did go see my mother in prison, it was a time for me to realize, hey, she's in here, she's doing something because of her something that she did, and these are the consequences. So at the time, it was confusing, and through time, even with my own mother working through her issues, and making it back out on top, it helped me realize that, we can be resilient and we can make it out of the situation. So again, like I said before, I didn't really ever talk about this issue before, because I felt it was a taboo subject. It was very embarrassing to talk about. But through my work in this area is what led me to really open up and be honest with what happened.
So when you say that children see their parents go to jail, and then the kids follow in that footsteps, did you ever see yourself going down that path?
I never had an opportunity, because my mom made sure of that. So she knew from early on she was not going to let that happen, and so she was very much the strategic director behind and letting me know, school was a priority, and she made sure I stayed after school to work on homework with my teachers, or sat at the front of the classroom so I'd always pay attention, or did after-school curriculums to just further myself in education. So, no, I never saw myself going down that path, because I was never saw the opportunity for it.
Yeah, I understand that you've worked to create the American Indian Criminal Justice Navigation Council. It's, I guess, the vehicle now that you're working with to achieve your goal there. Can you give us an idea of what that is?
Yeah, so the American Indian Criminal Justice Navigation Council was developed, initial idea by David Littleson, who had spent 20 years in prison for something he didn't do. And I jumped on the project later on and really helped it go further, because we saw a lack in where people were getting sentenced and they weren't speaking up, they weren't understanding because there's so many different things going on with public defenders having so much on their plate, and so no one was really there to fill in people what their rights, roles, and responsibilities were. So it was super important in that organization that we were training ex-offenders who are success stories to then turn around and be mentors to people in prison and giving them, okay, this is what your case is going to go to next. This is key players. This is what legal jargon means. But along with that was my role was making sure the children of these incarcerated people also had a voice in what was going on, and they weren't being left out of the conversation.
The part that you just mentioned, working with the children and families, and I see there's a bit here in some of the research material that I have here. It's you're helping reduce the trauma affecting family members as a result. Now, what did you see then when you started working with these families? What did they share? Were there any common feelings, or did each group kind of show you something different? So what did you do to deal with this family trauma?
So something that we did was we would have support group meetings every month, and that would give the opportunity for families to talk through things that other people don't necessarily understand. And from the kids' perspective, something that I'd never forget is when a little boy had spoken up about his mother, seeing his mother get arrested, and how it really affected him. And he's 10 or 11, and he's bawling his eyes out. And so there are stories out there, and like I said, with that traumatic experience of seeing your parent get arrested, I mean, what kid isn't going to be traumatized by that? So, our support group that would happen monthly was a way that we could work through those issues.
Did you discover a central theme, I guess, for lack of a better phrase, in the crimes that these parents had committed? There's everything out there from capital murder and to embezzlement and fraud and this kind of thing. Is there something that was reoccurring that you ran across more than once, more often?
Yeah, it varied. I know for women, a lot of it was more drug-related charges. For the men's side, I don't remember one clear one, but definitely for the women's side, there was clear drug-related charges, and that was another stat was more women were being incarcerated in Oklahoma than anywhere else. So seeing those were kind of triggering in that way, but that's the main thing I thought. But yeah.
What happens now? Before we get away from this thing, I think you've garnered some recognition for your work. Center for Native American Youth, 2018 Champion for Change, and Mvskoke Women's Leadership is the 2019 College of the Year. Plus, you're a member of a sorority, I believe, Alpha Pi Omega, and other things like that. It sounds like then you're carrying quite a banner for Native people there and doing quite well at it. But this kind of thing intrigues me. Does it cost you mentally, physically, spiritually? I mean, is there a burden to be borne there?
I'm sorry, I didn't catch the last question.
What's the price that you have to pay to do this work? I mean, is it hard? Does it kind of drain you spiritually or emotionally?
Yeah, so it does take a lot of energy and strength to tell my story each time when I'm advocating for what I'm doing. because of course what happened to me isn't something that's just going to go away, and having to retell that story over and over. And also, I know I'm doing it for a good reason. It does kind of drain me in those ways, but I mean, I'll keep telling my story over and over if I have to get this problem solved, to make a difference in this area. And all those accolades, I mean, they don't mean as much as they do without me doing this work. So I have to do what I have to do.
Yeah, well, we're proud of you, and I think you're a very brave person for taking this on. I always like to see the other side of the coin now. What is it that rewards you? What makes you feel good about doing this?
What makes me feel good about doing this is the feeling that I'm doing something with my life that is more than just me. And I know that kind of sounds cliche, but it really does make a difference to me, because I know this is something that's going to go on without me when I'm gone or not doing this work. And so just always having that thought in my mind, it's a generational thing. Like, what happened to me is a generational thing. The solutions are a generational thing. So just moving on throughout my life, I feel that is rewarding within itself.
So when speaking about the other side of the coin, do you have any testimonials from someone who's maybe been incarcerated and is out and is doing better for them and their family?
Do I have testimonials? Yes, I would say I have testimonials. Like, I know someone who got out like right after we had just started the program in Oklahoma, and he had nowhere to go, and David, he had literally got in his truck and picked him up and took him somewhere, gave him a few cash for a train ticket, gave him all these resources. This is where you gotta go. This organization's gonna help you, and then even helped him with his court fines and fees, with how to navigate that. And so even with just that little bit of help and navigating what to do when you get out and how not to go back, helped him not recidivate. And that was like 3 years ago, well, 2.5 years ago. And so just seeing that was the whole basis of that program. And having someone there to mentor you through the process when there's so many different loopholes, or just something that could just, one little thing could just trip you up and you're back in prison.
Okay, in the last couple of minutes we've got here, Isabel, what is the goal? What is your goal, and will you be publishing this study? What will happen there? So what do you hope for in the end result?
So my end result, so right here at the Next 100, I have 2 years to do a few things. It's one, do research, two, develop policies for from that research, and three, advocate. So one thing I'm working on is on the state level in Oklahoma is to pass criminal justice reform policies. So my end goal is that Oklahoma's going to get the new criminal justice reform laws, and that the number of incarcerated people will go down, especially Indigenous people.
All right. Well, Isabel Coronado, we wish the best for you and success in this in this very heavy load that you've got there. And I'm just so glad that there's another person out there tackling these kinds of questions. It's just wonderful to hear that, and you've got some recognition for it. I'm happy to hear that. Okay, well, I tell you what, we're going to have to cut out here and move on to our next segment. So thank you so much, Isabel Coronado. We appreciate you and your work, and hopefully you're in our area. We'll get to talk with you again.
No, thank you for this.
All right, we're going to be taking a short pause here, and we'll bring in our next guest. We're going to talk about another heavy-duty situation, and This is suicide prevention time. So stay with us here on Mvskoke Radio. Okay, Skylar, you want to do the honors there and introduce your guests?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm here sitting with Jill and Tyler from Behavioral Health. Can I have you two introduce yourselves and your title?
Hi, I am Jill Sago. I am Project Director for the Garrett Lee Smith Memorial Suicide Prevention Grant.
I think we lost you there for a second. Could you tell us again?
I'm Jill Sago, Project Director for the Garrett Lee Smith Memorial Suicide Prevention Grant.
My name is Tyler Stone. I'm the project director for the Native Connections and SPI grants.
Okay, so we're here discussing mental health, and next week is Suicide Awareness Week. So I wanted to ask you guys, what is it that you do for the nation as far as like mental health and those sort of things?
Well, we provide a lot of training and outreach. We go into the communities, train communities in community centers. We train our Creek Nation staff and Department of Health staff in identifying, recognizing warning signs for suicide, and then help them decipher what to do about it when they encounter an individual with a suicidal ideation or behavior.
How often do you go into the communities and have these conversations?
We go in regularly. There's something going on at least every week. My grant does a lot of self-care workshops as well to help people who are dealing with those who are suicidal to manage their own stress levels better. We do QPR training. One of the things that's great that all of our grants do, mine and Tyler's, is we train all of the incoming Department of Health staff in QPR, question, persuade, refer, suicide prevention, gatekeeper training during their orientation. So Tyler, you want to talk about your grant?
Yeah, we do a lot of similar work that Jill's grant does, the GLS. We try to work a lot with schools and other agencies who may have clients as well. For both of our grants, we really believe that suicide is everyone's business. So we believe that everyone should be able to be trained in QPR. So the more people we have trained in recognizing those warning signs, the more lives we can essentially save. It's very similar to CPR. If the more people we have trained in CPR, the more likely we are to help somebody who has maybe collapsed due to heart failure. So it's kind of the same principle with QPR as well.
So I took the QPR class when it was offered, I think, last year, and it's a lot of information that you give and a lot of warning signs. How important is it to have these classes to identify these signs in somebody and maybe help them?
I think it's really important. A lot of people may not be familiar with what some of those warning signs are. And a lot of what I think we run into is this fear of bringing up that topic, that fear of how do I approach somebody who I think might be having these thoughts of wanting to end their life. What we try to do in our QPR trainings, we aim to kind of normalize and kind of help take away that stress of asking somebody about their suicidal intent, because we have this idea that if I see somebody who's struggling, whether it be a family member or a friend, and I ask them about their suicidal intent, I may in some way plant this idea of suicide in their head. And what we found through the research is that that's not the case. In fact, it's the opposite. We know that when you ask somebody directly about their suicidal intent, it lowers their anxiety, and it provides an opportunity to open up those lines of communication, right?
So when you say there's research and there's some data, what is some of the data that we have that we can go off of to help better educate people about suicidal signs and mental health awareness?
Sure. Jill, do you want to talk about some of the ones you have?
Absolutely. Right now, Oklahoma is number 16 in the nation for the number of suicides per 100,000 people. We had 756 suicides in Oklahoma in 2017, which is actually a significant drop from the year before. In 2016, there were 822 suicides. So I think due to the prevention efforts, not only among the tribes, but at a state level, we are actually making a dent. We're making a difference in people's lives. We're saving lives. So I think that's just fantastic.
Does your information give you an idea of who's doing this? I mean, we hear so much about returning military who've been through the messiness in the Far East. Now we're hearing a significant number of policemen or police
That's right.
officers are
Right.
engaged.
There are 22 military veterans, active service members every day who take their own lives, and the majority of those are using firearms. Women coming out of the military are 3 times more likely to attempt suicide than males coming out of the military. And, those are probably for reasons that, just like people say, women are much more prone to expressing their emotions. Men tend to not talk about it as much. And another really high-risk group for suicide are physicians, medical professionals, and that's another group that we really don't talk about. Our Native American population in Oklahoma, we have about 30 per 100,000 Native Americans in Oklahoma who take their own lives, as compared to the average for our state of 19.2 taking their own lives. So our people are significantly more at risk than any other population. So one thing that we're doing as a tribe is trying to educate our people and our community members, our professionals. We want, like Tyler said, to start conversations and get the suicide topic in the forefront of what we discuss in daily life, thereby decreasing the stigma associated with it.
So you mentioned men to women statistics. I was reading somewhere that women are more likely to attempt it and men are more likely to commit it. Why is that?
It's kind of hard to find like that number or kind of that definitive answer, right? What we believe, and Jill kind of alluded to this, was this idea of men not reaching out for help. So a lot of times we hear young boys growing up being told, don't cry, don't show emotion, right? We believe that can be pretty harmful when we kind of create this narrative that men are not allowed to express their emotions or have those conversations among other men as well. Men typically use more lethal means as well, such as a firearm. So we know that can attribute to the death rate as well. But I think a lot of it, you could argue that a lot of it has to do with, again, that idea of men not feeling comfortable or able to really have those conversations and reach out for help.
So I know one of them, like you said, they bottle up their feelings on. That's what they've been taught.
Sure.
I know a lot with the tribe, it's kind of that same thing. So it's almost like a global scale of, hey, men just bottle up their feelings. Why is it that the male figures are afraid to talk about it? Is it pride? Is it more of just like we don't want to show our weaknesses, or what is it?
I think it could be a combination of both those things. I think culturally, looking at kind of at least in the U.S., there just really is this male socialization, this man box, if you will, right? That at a young age, I'm told not to not to cry, not to express my emotions, right? And like I said earlier, I think that can be pretty damaging when we create this culture in which men don't believe that they can reach out for help, or feel that, I have to ensure that everything is perfect, and if something is going on, I need to keep it in here, keep it bottled up. And we're all people, and we have every right to express all emotions that we have.
Now, many native cultures, honor the warrior, and as one of the highest pinnacles you can achieve in our society. Sure. And it seems to me quite easy to come to a conclusion that warrior mentality or this facade contributes to the problems. We don't cry. We're warriors. We can take the pain. We can take the injuries, internal and external. So have you seen that figure into what you have to deal with, either of you?
I think we do, and you can almost compare it to the rate of military suicide,
right? Exactly.
Because of the things that are experienced in life, whether it's got to do with the military or not. There is a lot of trauma going on in Oklahoma, and we actually have one of the highest trauma rates of any state in the union, and that's something that men, I think, as a population, just don't want to talk about. It's, again, they're seen as powerful figures, as masculine figures, and I think it's that I don't want to say stigma, but the whole mentality associated with masculinity. It is not seen as acceptable for men to talk about those things that they've experienced in the past. They just do suppress it. They do repress it, and I'm sure men know more about it than I do. But one of the other issues associated with male suicide versus female is the method of suicide. Men tend to use more lethal means. And when we talk about lethal means, that means how deadly is the method that the person is utilizing. And men tend to use firearms more than women. And when you think about Oklahoma, when you think about our native population, it's usually the men's that are getting more guns. They're in charge of guns. They're the hunters. So that really does contribute to the higher rate of suicide among males.
So, speaking of males, let's flip it over and talk about the female side of it. What's some of the key differences between males who maybe attempt suicide as far as females?
Women do attempt suicide. I believe the current statistic is 3.5 times more than males. Women tend to use less lethal means. Number one method for women in their suicide attempts is poisoning, and that can come from either prescription drugs or household items like cleansing products, things like that, that they can drink. One of the primary issues for women is going to be, again, trauma, sexual abuse, physical abuse, domestic violence, and all of those fall under the classification of relationship problems. And we do have some data showing that relationship problems are very, very high on the list of contributing factors to suicide attempts.
So leading into that, with our previous interview today, she spoke about incarceration. I know incarceration was one of the factors of some research that I looked up. It was like poverty, incarceration rate, maybe their education. What are some of the key factors that lead to people with their mental health, and what are some of the things that are causing it?
Causing mental health, or causing suicide ideation?
Maybe a little bit of both. Maybe the suicide. Yeah, let's talk about that more.
So we look at warning signs and risk factors, mm-hmm. right? So everything that you just mentioned is a potential risk factor.
As far as poverty, unemployment, things like that.
Mm-hmm. What we found in suicide prevention is that the more risk factors or warning signs that an individual has, then obviously the more risk they are for having thoughts of wanting to take their own life.
One of the things that we see in our community are those with poverty. Of course, that is a major contributing factor, but not all of those who attempt or die by suicide do have mental health issues. Some of the risk factors associated are, fear of incarceration and actual incarceration. I spoke with a corrections officer recently who told me that they have at least one suicide per week in the prison systems in Oklahoma. And there are just multiple attempts. Other risk factors include loss of family members, especially if that is by suicide. Those who lose a family member to suicide are at about 4 times greater risk of attempting suicide themselves. Other risk factors include unemployment. We are, as a society right now, independent people. We want to be able to provide for ourselves, provide for our families, and losing a job or not even being able to find a job are just such problems for people because we aren't able to take care of ourselves.
So let's talk about the road we're heading down. Where, as a tribe, are we going to start this conversation of maybe getting some people help?
I think we're going in a pretty good direction. We've been blessed to receive funding from IHS and from SAMHSA, which is federal funding, to have these programs that can provide these trainings. We have about 5 or 6 individuals who are trained to actually do the QPR trainings in our office, which is great because that means that we have more staff that can go out and train more people. When we have conferences, and I'll let Jill talk about the Hope Conference that we just had, we are seeing a lot of tribal leaders at these conferences, which tells us that it's an important topic, and to receive that buy-in and see the tribal leaders that we have is awesome, and lets us know that they have our backs, right? Buy-in is one of the things that we're always going to be pushing for when we talk about mental health and suicide prevention, because we know that it is stigmatized and it's scary to talk about. It's not fun to talk about. It's hard to talk about. But we believe that by having these hard conversations, we're saving lives, because we know that there's a lot of people that are out there that are struggling.
Have you ever spoken with Chief Floyd or any, like you said, some of the tribal leaders? Have you ever spoken to them about mental health awareness?
I've spoken with a couple. Mm-hmm. Chief Floyd specifically, I don't believe I've had that conversation. But I've had conversations with Second Chief, and he seems really on board, and he really appreciates every time that we're out at events. And he's come to a lot of our events. One in particular was he came and threw the first pitch at a Drillers game. We had a Drillers night out, and we kind of hosted that night. And it was all about suicide prevention and mental health awareness and resources. And we just really blasted out positive messages the whole night, had resource booths, had resources for all the people in the stands. I think it was like a sold-out game, too, so we had a lot of people.
So you speak on events like the Hope Conference. Mm-hmm. How important is it to have these events where people can come out and it's almost informal? People tell their stories, people tell where they've gone in life and how they've overcome some things. How important is it to show the tribal community, or even anybody that wants to show up, these testimonials, and maybe just to say, hey, everything can get better? Mm-hmm.
Well, it's really important because we need people to know that they're not alone. Even those who are survivors of suicide, when we talk about survivors, those are people who have lost people, loved ones, family members, friends to suicide. A lot of times they feel like they're alone. And even though grief is very personalized, it's different for everyone, we want people to know that there is help available. One of the really cool things that we have going in our behavioral health program is we've partnered with the Tristez Grief Center out of Tulsa, and they come down and do group therapy for those who have lost loved ones to suicide. And we also do monthly workshops where people can come and express themselves through art, because a lot of times they just don't know the right words to say. And of course, Native people are very creative, and they're able to create a project to honor their loved ones. And that can really help get a lot of that energy, a lot of that emotion out that they're not able to express overtly.
So when you speak on the creativity that we have, you have these classes like the beading class that's coming up, and you have some other things that are in the works. How much of an informal environment is this in order to get that conversation started, to say, hey, we're here to get your mind off it, but resources are available?
Well, our Grief Center workshops don't even require that people discuss their griefs. Anybody can come. They don't have to actually talk about it. It's just expressive, and it is completely informal.
Yeah, it's kind of just this idea of just creating a space where if they want to talk about it, they can. You know, we're not going to pry when we're talking about these sort of events. But we want to create a place where you're practicing self-care or you're practicing culture, and we're also available to talk to you if you need that help as well.
Well, we want it to be low pressure. We don't want to force people to discuss things that they're not ready to discuss. And we want it to be a safe environment for people, because I know our community is tight-knit. Everybody knows everybody, it seems. And a lot of people have a fear of expressing those feelings, those emotions, whether they're thinking about suicide themselves or they have lost somebody. It can be really hard to share when you think everybody is listening. So we really think it's important to create that safe space.
Now, when you said reconnect with culture, we just had the conversation that a lot of men need to be warriors, and that's how they see themselves and other people see them. So what does it mean to reconnect to culture if that's the mindset that we have?
So reconnecting to culture is this idea of, so we believe culture is a protective factor, so things that help keep us grounded, right? And we know that a risk factor is if you feel like you've been disconnected or your culture has been disrupted in some way. So having somebody come in who may feel, let's say, spiritually exhausted, or maybe just kind of lost or going through the motions, or maybe asking those questions. Why am I here? What's the point, right? What's the point of all of this? This being life, right? We know that, especially for Native Americans, you know, connecting to that culture, connecting to something that keeps you grounded or kind of refills your spirituality cup can be a very helpful thing for a lot of people. So by us offering these classes where we're practicing culture, this may be the first time that somebody has ever practiced beading, or this may be somebody who's seasoned at beading, but they want to go and bring, let's say, a granddaughter or grandson or a daughter or son, right? So it's a way just to kind of keep that culture going, right? Because if we don't practice this culture, then we run the risk of it going away.
So there's resources within the tribe. What are some of these resources if someone's having thoughts, or if they say, hey, I have a family member who is seeking help, or I want to seek help on their behalf? What can someone do to maybe get some of these resources?
Sure. So one of the resources that we promote a lot is the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline number. Now this number is it's 1-800-273-TALK or 8255. You can use this number if you or someone you know is in a suicide crisis or potentially in a crisis. So you can call this number and they can actually help guide you on the proper steps to take.
And one thing about our suicide prevention lifeline, which is 1-800-273-TALK, you know, we want to repeat that many times. There is an Oklahoma phone bank. So when people in Oklahoma call the crisis line, they're getting somebody local. And they don't necessarily even have to have a suicide crisis going on. It can be any type of crisis.
We have talked about people who are dealing with the mindset here of perhaps taking these steps. For friends and family, those of us who are loved ones, are there the signal flags that maybe we should be aware of? The warning signs that perhaps someone is thinking thoughts they probably shouldn't?
Some of the warning signs include just changes in mood or attitude. People could have co-occurring disorders. They might have a mental health disorder plus a substance use disorder. And actually, one of the highest risk groups among mental health disorders for suicide are those with bipolar disorder. Other risk factors include giving away prized possessions, things that really mean a lot to them. They include being fired from a job, expelled from school, a feeling that they're not safe.
If you start hearing a loved one having a lot of statements of hopelessness as well, that's a risk factor. You can really tell when a loved one is maybe just not their quote-unquote normal self, right? And like everything that Jill said, those are the warning signs that we look for, right? But we're really listening for, are they saying things that causes us to kind of take a step back and say, hey, listen, this may be kind of a big deal, right? So they may say things like, I want out, or I can't do this anymore, right? So they may not specifically come out and say, I'm thinking of taking my own life, but it's kind of that indirect verbal clue that we want to look for. And we may hear direct verbal clues. So we may hear somebody say, I want to kill myself. And at that point, we have to take action, right? This may involve us driving directly to that person's house, right? Loading them up in the car, taking them to the hospital, or taking them to our behavioral health clinic, or if they're not native, taking them to Cree Oaks, right?
So you might even go as far as perhaps getting rid of these medications that can be so deadly, or
locking them up,
or taking the firearm out of the house, or at least the bullets, and letting people know that there is someone out there that does care and wants to help.
Absolutely. And that can be hard. That can be a hard conversation for that individual, because when they are having those thoughts of suicide, they may be in a pretty dark place, and they may not see any solution to their problem.
So before I let you go, I want just to reiterate those numbers that people can do, or call, or maybe even text.
Sure. So
we do have a crisis text line, which is really cool because a lot of people are uncomfortable speaking about their thoughts, their feelings. So they can text this number. They text the word CREEK, CREEK, to 741-741. Text the word CREEK to 741-741, and there's 24/7 help available. They generally will respond in less than 5 minutes. And the same goes for the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline, which we talked about before. It's 1-800-273-TALK. That's 1-800-273-TALK. And then again, they will get a response within minutes. There is also, with the Suicide Prevention Lifeline, they can chat online. So they can go to suicidepreventionlifeline.com and connect with someone there online as well.
Jill and Tyler, I appreciate you guys spending the time coming in talking about this, and thank you so much.
I appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
Okay, we have a couple of minutes left here, so let's run through some community announcements real quick. First of all, the Castle of Mvskoke is overrun with zombies, and in need of runners to help clear the grounds. The 7th annual 5K will be held on September 14th. That's a Saturday at 1 p.m. Saturday, September 14th. Runners will weave through obstacles while facing the castle's zombie population. Register now at okcastle.com to receive the early bird prize. Proceeds go to the Mvskoke County Disaster Relief Committee. On-site food will be available from the Smokin' Dragon and drinks at the Crown Inn Pub. Registration begins at noon on the 14th. This year we are running for area flood victims, so we want your crew to show up. The ZR deals to save at checkout will be available, and we'll see you at the Castle of Mvskoke.
And you're going to want to save this date. It's the 17th annual Pink Party Breast Cancer Awareness on Tuesday, October 29th at the Glenpool Conference Center with a keynote speaker, Dr. John Tedesco. So that's Tuesday, October 29th for the 17th annual Pink Party for Breast Cancer Awareness.
And today actually is the date for the Diabetes Awareness Summit. That's going on up at the Glenpool Conference Center in Glenpool. That's over behind the Walmart. They have several guest speakers and a full agenda of programs and things that are designed to assist you, including our old ex-co-host Darren DeLon teaching a dance class in bachata. So go check that out and put him to work. And if you want to get a hold of those folks, I believe you can get a ride up there if you don't have the transportation. You want to give them a call at 918-807-1651 or 918-758-5148. Okay, that is the community announcements here. Tyler, now you've been on staff here with us now for how many weeks?
I have been here this is going on my third week actually, but I interned here before from Mvskoke Media, so now I got brought back and I'm working full time.
Okay, we're going to put you to work here. Actually did a pretty good job here. I'm wondering if we're going to be able to count on you in the future for more of this material.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, you will be able to. I went to school for broadcasting, so being on the radio is a passion of mine. So I love being here. Love having my voice heard.
Uh-oh, there's somebody after my job, I think.
Maybe a little bit. Jill just told me about an event that they're having.
Oh, great.
Yeah, at the Orpheum on September 23rd, they're going to be screening Suicide, The Ripple Effect. So here in Okmulgee on September 23rd at the Orpheum. So if you want to go check that out, feel free to come down. Is there a certain time for that, or?
Yeah, it's actually going to be, doors are going to open at 6:45 p.m. The show will start at 7:15. It's about 90-minute documentary. And then afterwards, we're going to do a little Q&A, and we'll actually open up a QPR training, so a suicide prevention training, if anyone wants to stick around for that as well.
And what day of the week is that? September 23rd?
That's going to be on a Monday.
On a Monday? Okay.
Monday night, yep. And
Awesome.
then, if I may, really quick, that following day, we're actually going to have our annual Hope Walk.
Okay.
It's a suicide awareness walk. It's going to be at the Mound from 3 p.m. to 5 p.m. And we're going to meet on the east side of the Mound by the flagpole. We'll have different resources. We'll do a quick welcome. We'll walk around the track. And then we'll do our remembrance ceremony, and we'll have some refreshments and water as well.
All right.
Okay, well, tell you what, Skylar, we're going to run out of time here in a couple of seconds here, so we need to say to our listeners, Mado Mabo Hedgetskut, we appreciate you listening to us today, and catch us next week for more Mvskoke Radio. You've been listening to Mvskoke Radio. Join us again next week for more local, tribal, and community news and updates. Mado.